about 2/3 of risk managers say that their organization has ESG goals and targets, but only 17% of those risk managers have documented targets themselves with clear milestones. So to me, this says risk managers are caught on the back foot a bit on this. They're in sort of a reactive position. And I think that what needs to happen now is they need to get ahead of this and start thinking of it as a risk issue.
Welcome to the WTW podcast, Construction Blueprints, where we discuss the latest risk management and insurance trends, as well as issues facing the construction industry. We'll speak with a variety of construction leaders and experts on global topics who can help provide you a blueprint for building your industry knowledge.
Hey everybody, I'm Bill Creedon, and I'm the Global Head of Construction for Willis Towers Watson. And I want to welcome everybody to our WTW Construction Blueprints podcast. In today's topic, we're going to talk a lot about construction and ESG. And how does it really interplay with construction? And what are the different aspects of it along the whole chain of a construction project? I'm really delighted to be joined today by Lisa Lipuma and Julien Hornacek. And why don't we take a second? Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself before we get going?
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm Lisa Lipuma. I lead our enterprise risk management consulting practice for North America. And ESG is near and dear to me, as is climate. So we'll get into both of those today. I'll hand it over to Julien to introduce himself.
Hey guys, nice to be with you today. So indeed, I'm Julien Hornacek, and I'm leading the ERM capabilities in Europe, including climate, and I'm part of the French task force when it comes to ESG, hence very happy to have this discussion on ESG and construction today with you guys.
Well, thank you both. It is great to have you here. And this is a topic that is really in every boardroom. It's being discussed. It's being talked about around every project that's coming out as different countries are investing in infrastructure and all these different aspects to bolster their economies. Everybody starts talking about ESG. And so I want to start at the basics. And maybe, Lisa, I'll come to you. What is ESG in general? And is there a way to even put it out as far as how it might apply to construction from your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I'd say that ESG is fundamentally, it's a term used by investors and clients and regulators and credit rating agencies to evaluate corporate behavior and determine the current and future financial performance and sustainability of companies. So this isn't entirely new. A lot of the elements of ESG are things that this same audience would look at for a company for a long time, just sort of indicators of investability, in short, but then it's taking a bit of a new turn now as well. So I'd say that for construction, there are certain things that pop out for construction as key issues. The key issues, according to MSCI, are health and safety, opportunities in clean tech, corporate behavior of bribery, corruption, business ethics, and fraud, and shareholder rights, being that many construction companies are majority owned, and the ESG investor folks want to look out for the interests of minority shareholders. But that's it at the very top level.
Yeah. Lisa, you used a term there, reference a group, MSCI. What does that represent?
They're a rating agency, really. So they've, for a long time, we've actually used them in for instance, our D&O model to provide corporate governance scores and accounting scores. So just looking at different business behaviors as indicators of risk, really.
Okay, good. We recently sponsored a survey of, I think it was around 300 risk managers around ESG. Can you maybe share a few of the highlights that came out on that?
Sure. Yeah. To me, the biggest takeaway from this, and I think this sort of wraps up what my interactions with risk managers are on ESG quite a lot, is that about 2/3 of risk managers say that their organization has ESG goals and targets, but only 17% of those risk managers have documented targets themselves with clear milestones. So to me, this says risk managers are caught on the back foot a bit on this. They're in sort of a reactive position. And I think that what needs to happen now is they need to get ahead of this and start thinking of it as a risk issue, and many risk issues, really, versus just a single issue.
This might be a little bit of a tough question, but if I were to say in the life of a project, a contractor comes in at a certain point to build the project, and maybe they've done a little bit of design, but an owner who envisions the project and the finished project. Where does the ESG aspect of it lie the most?
So it might be worth taking a little bit of a step back and thinking of ESG as, there are the three categories, ES and
Yep.
G, and then there are, individual things under each of those. So carbon emissions is part of it, but also resilience to climate change is part of it. Worker safety is part of it. General corporate governance is part of it. So it's all these things. And so I think that it just driving everyone in that value chain to have to be mindful of all these things in their own role in it, but then also in their partners' roles in it and the downstream, whoever's, the ultimate user as well.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point, and I think we'll expand on it in a bit here. But when you think of all the different aspects that you just mentioned, you could think of using materials that are friendlier to the environment or socially more acceptable, but also cost more money. And owners may look at it and think, well, I don't want to go that route yet. I'm going to wait. Or a market, a carrier could look at what's being built and think, we're not that comfortable with this product yet. I'll use the example of CLT, cross-laminated timber, where some of the carriers are still not quite, to a point where they want to accept that as a good building material. Yet it's been recognized as probably better for us overall from an environmental standpoint and from a green factor. A lot of that, I think, from the construction side is yet to be developed, but I think we'll hit more on that. I just wanted to expand that a bit. It sort of leads me to the different pillars that you talked about. And Julien, you bring a little different perspective to this. What do you see really around these? Can you differentiate some of the pillars as you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned some obvious things, and of course, among all the pillars, we see quite a few things. I mean, under the E, those numbers are super well known. But we know that construction represents almost half of global energy consumption. I think it's around 40%. We have a quarter of global water usage. We have a third of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is quite significant, right? But also, given that I'm in the EU side, I wanted to just to show an example, of the growing regulatory pressure. We have this regulation in the EU, which is called the Energy Performance of Building Directive. It's been there for quite some time because it belongs to the Fit for 55 EU package. And amongst the updates which are discussed, what do we have? We have a wildlife carbon legislation. And when we have a potential upgrade of the European building stock to zero emission by 2050. That only, just this one, implies that 75% of the building stock will need to be renovated in the next 25 years. 75%. That means renovation rates will have to double. So just to show you, so we talk about, pressure from all kind of stakeholders, but the regulatory pressure is extremely big. And this is one, which if you don't pay enough attention, might very likely impact significantly some of the majors which are part of the construction sector nowadays.
You bring up a point, Julien. You bring up the European Union and the different countries that are all looking at it. Do you think that hurts our progress? My question really is, do you think the individual nature of each, government or each municipality that's looking at it, does it slow us down in our advancement of what we want to do around ESG?
Very good question. And this might merely be my opinion, but I do believe, that the stakes are so high that you need at some point the footprint, the action coming from, I wouldn't say government, because I don't want to people to be afraid, but from a localized, centralized body. Without that, I'm afraid that, as you said, due to the individual nature of some stakeholders, we might struggle, to get this extra mile. I mean, and we have to. It's not an option. We have to get there. So relying solely on those institution will be a failure, but using that as a leverage and having those central institutions designing a core framework and a binding one, I think it's absolutely key to then allow the whole sector to go further and be able to take the right actions which are needed.
ESG is so broad that every agency that rates it, almost every person that looks at it has their own take on it. So maybe we can agree generally what underlies it, but the weightings are different for every agency. If you have an ESG score, it's different for everyone who scores you, and they think that different things are more or less important than others. So it is so challenging that you're not going to have this one opinion. And so partly it's going to be market driven. And that is what's happening now, at least in the US. It's more market driven for some of this disclosure and things like that. But the net zero 2050, I mean, you're right that requires an industrial revolution on the scale of any other industrial revolution that we've gone through economically, in the last several hundred years. It's huge changes that have to happen.
I wanted to just add something, but about maybe the macro side of how ESG is crucial to construction. I mean, and maybe it's less the case for luxury or retailer, but we have an expanding population, and urbanization is going to increase, I don't know, maybe twofold, threefold, I don't know, but of course it's going to increase. So if we let it go, if it's being left unaddressed, then the construction ecosystem carbon output is going to blow over, because due to the sheer fact that the population is going to be multiplied, that cities are bigger and bigger. So that's why to come back to your initial question, then do we need to have this kind of help or maybe this role from institution? I guess that the dynamic of the urbanization is so big that just any help is welcome. So either it comes from individual actions or for government or supranationals. But I think we're not in a position to refuse any help, irrespective of where that help is coming from.
Do you feel we're at a tipping point as a society that will force us to work together to address the ESG aspects? Do you feel like in the last year, maybe we've even hit that tipping point? Lisa, what do you think?
I think definitely on climate, yes. And I think that a lot of the work that Julien and I are both doing now is looking at climate as a financial risk and putting a number on it. So part of the difference between what has been happening historically and what is happening going forward is companies had to disclose, at least public companies, had to disclose material risks in their 10K. But how do you define materiality? There wasn't a set timeline on how far in the future you had to look. So that is a big change as part of all the COVID disruption, all the supply chain disruptions, people are looking at risk differently. And so they're taking a longer term look at climate risk as it's an amplifier of all risks, the transition and the physical risk. So I think that we've hit a tipping point on that.
I'm completely with you on that one. I mean, we know that most of the building stock which will be there in 2050, has already been built. So somehow we're already beyond the tipping point, because the building stock is already there. So we don't know what the climate change is going to look like, but we know that buildings have been built, and maybe 70%, 80% of the future, stock is there. So how is it going to cope, with, with hailstorms, with rainfalls, with any climate impact? And so, we need to work right now. We need to make sure that whatever we do, so we're liaising back to renovating, but we need to make sure that whatever ideas we come up with, to facilitate that renovation is, we give it enough thought, because it's already there.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to climate, because I think this is something that happens. Climate's the easiest for everyone to understand. And so they naturally fall to talk about ESG, they talk about climate. I want to talk about politics, and I want to talk about the impact of political environments. Have you seen over the last few years that the almost extremist aspects of politics impacting ESG around the world? Do either of you have a thought on that?
It's so interesting that when you read the news on ESG, every time it's brought up, it is very political in how it's reported. And I imagine if you're very much in politics, it's of course political. Everything in politics is political. In my work, it really hasn't been. And I think part of that is the approach that we take. It's pretty dry, to be honest. To look at ESG, we say this is a framework to look at different risks and how different things can go wrong. Part of the reason people talk about climate is it's the one that's so different now than it has been. But a lot of these things are things that you're already looking at. Again, it's workplace safety, it's product safety, it's general governance. A lot of these aren't new, but just saying, if you break these down into their individual issues, these are mostly just good business.
Actually, politics, paying attention, maybe a bit too much, I don't know, about ESG, makes sense because, you talk about climate, but the S is super crucial, because the S is about workforce, is about, well-being, is about diversity. So it's crucial, to finding a purpose. The G is governance, is business ethics, is human rights, is actually making sure that the whole supply chain is actually useful. So, so we talk a lot about climate, but the thing is, if you pay attention to the S, very often when you think about the construction industry and about health and safety within the construction industry, the focus has been on physical safety. However, over the last years, we talk about mental health and we talk about well-being. So these two are completely skyrocketing. And this is now one of the most prevalent causes of illness and injury. Yeah. So that's something, and we talk about, we've seen, majors, on those super large projects, thinking about how to feed well, people working on the project, about transportation, So that's why, to come back to your question about why politics, does it do too much? Actually, no, because it's just ESG encompasses every element that is critical to making sure that a society with a capital S functions well, and takes care of the participants.
You're making me think kind of a different path here too, because if we step back and look at what's happening, I think in the last few years, attention really has been brought more onto ESG, and everyone is hearing it. But we're also seeing a generational shift in a lot of the businesses. In construction in particular, you're seeing a generation that's, I'll use the term, I don't like it, but aging out. And a new group of younger people are moving in to be decision makers. I see it in our own insurance industry as well. Is it impacting carriers, how they evaluate ESG? Is it impacting claims that may be arising, or how people are setting the course for their businesses? And Lisa, maybe again, start with you. Are you seeing much of that?
I think so, to some degree. And then it varies by industry too. Some tend to be more forward-looking, and some tend to be more sort of set in their ways. And insurance is one of those industries that isn't quick to change. So underwriting is inherently based on backward-looking data. And I think you brought up some of the new technology before on that. What is it, CLTs?
Yep. Cross-laminated timber.
Yes. Underwriters don't like new things, and it doesn't matter how good it is on paper and in theory. They need to see a claims history on it, and there isn't one for that really yet. And maybe that's a good sign, right? There aren't claims yet, but they don't know until they see it. But insurance is slow to move, but it's moving. You are seeing new underwriting criteria coming out that's sort of to force to get in line with transition, and because they have investors who are looking forward on this.
Do you think the industry is going to move, meaning the insurance industry, is it going to move quickly enough to acknowledge, and I'll say reward, clients that are willing to take those initial steps, spend more money on a project, be more creative and more attentive to all aspects of ESG in their designs? Do you think we're going to be able to move quickly enough for that? Or do you think can we afford the carriers to stay like they have and always looking backwards instead of ahead?
The thing is, our economy has always been characterized, and more specifically about the last years, about disruptions, and that applies to any sector. So, for instance, if you look at construction, if majors, they don't decide to allocate enough resources, whether budget, whether people, whether technology, and of course there's going to be new players coming in, maybe new players who are more agile and who came up with solutions like being low carbon players, and hence there will be more agile, and hence they will be securing these new projects. So the ones that the majors won't be able to get, because due to the size, of course, of their operations, they were not reactive enough. And I mean that's it's been happening all over the place in the economy, where you've seen those traditional players being maybe a bit too sure of their how can I say, competitive edge, not being agile enough and not being disruptive enough, hence, losing some market share. And if we add that regulation bit, if they start, if we see governments heavily penalizing, those traditional corporates with a large carbon footprint or any other ESG impact, then we will just paves the way for new entrants. I mean, it won't be just a small startup, from around the block. It will be, of course, a significant company, but still, it paves the way for these new guys, to get in and secure those contracts and basically not replace, but just gain some extra market share.
Lisa, I want to give you the opportunity to maybe also expand on that. Did you have thoughts around that same question?
It's sort of a question of which domino is going to fall first, too, though. Right. So, for instance, government contracts are pushing a lot of the construction dollars these days, and sometimes they specify materials. So just who has the choice on what is used? And so is the government going to change what they say first? Are the insurance companies going to say, well, we won't write this anymore unless you're using low carbon materials, unless you are aligning with net zero goals? And it could, it's almost a game of chicken at this point of who's going to move first.
Right.
But I think that it will, though. I mean, I think we have to. It
ties back to, though, let's go to all aspects of ESG. It does go back to people want to see everyone in business making the appropriate changes to help us all. And the biggest issue in construction, or one of the biggest issues in construction, attracting and retaining labor. It's a very, very big issue. If you see, the projects have increased in size substantially. When you look at some of the semiconductor manufacturing facilities that are being built, these are in the 10 to 20 to far more billions of US dollars that are being put on one project site. And when you look at the number of workers that's going to be required, can you see a time when someone's approach to ESG will actually be a strong indicator and attractor of bringing labor onto their projects?
I think it is already. I mean, it's hard to hire right now for anyone and anything. I think, people have more choice over where and how they work, and people are being choosier, that they aren't going to agree to these harder conditions or unsafe conditions and things like that. I think it's happening already.
I did a few projects last year for one of the largest oil and gas company. And one of the most critical risks was attracting new candidates. And the company, they were quite eager to attract the brightest engineers, just graduating from the leading European schools. And actually they could not, because whenever they would go on campus and have this discussion, of course there would be some, don't get me wrong, there will still be people eager to go to oil and gas because it's a fantastic sector with a million things to be done. But still, the trend is shifting. And like 30 years ago, that was one of the hot sector, and every smart engineer would go there because you could do a million things over the globe. But right now, it's changing, and they're paying attention. So of course, for oil and gas, it's going to be the E, but there could be some other companies where it would be the S would be an issue. Some other where it would be the G, which would be an issue. But globally, the ESG is getting an issue. So it's not a binary thing. Don't get me wrong. I can't tell you that tomorrow you will see a massive drop and it will be over for some companies to hire. Of course, it's a wave. It's a lengthy wave. It takes time. But if you just don't act swift enough, then you will react and you will wake up in 10 years from now and you will have lose all your bright workforce, or the workforce will have age and not being replaced. So it's very typical of HR risk. It's a lengthy wave. You have to monitor that on a daily basis.
I think, Julien, you hit on something that, the oil and gas industry. People think, oil and gas, it's dirty. There's no way we want to work in that industry. Actually, I think, one of the ways I've seen it or read about it is that industry also has to get on the continuum to move from here over to where they are, fitting in more, I guess I would say, on the ESG expectations, and they all want to. So it's not for us to desert them because, frankly, the world's not ready to just go to, 100% electric or what's perceived as clean energy. It's got to be built. And you need to build it with contractors that are ready to do that. I think at the same time, we need people to understand, though, that there isn't just a day that it all flips off. If you talked about the electrification of the world for, all these EVs, electric vehicles that are being done, you need a whole new infrastructure built. Just go drive around and look at all the gas stations. You need to have EV stations that are ready to set up to do your charging. All that needs to happen. So it's an exciting time, but I think things need to be looked at a little bit.
You mentioned exciting, and I mean, there are exciting solutions right now within constructions. Industry 4.0, digital twins.
What's a digital twin?
It's basically creating, your building, your design, creating it online, and by having captors, and using IoT on the current building, you actually replicate the actual building into a digital one. Hence, when you do your scenario testing and when you just run hypothesis on the digital twin, you can see the actual consequences that would happen, had it been real. So basically, it allows you to simulate the reality, and so you can run hundreds, thousands of different scenarios, whether it's ESG or anything else. You can run hundreds of scenarios and just model the impacts and then capture, retain the most efficient solution to your problem. So it's all Industry 4.0, is data, it's creating a huge field where, talking about, the bright student, but where they can go there, develop new solutions, and help, design something which works well for all the sector.
Lisa, maybe move on to what are you seeing from a technology standpoint?
Technology is a really interesting one, and it has a lot of the same labor issues that we're talking about as well. So some of it is new technologies that are out there and are ready to be installed, but there's not always enough labor to do it. And then there's also obsolescence risk too. So it's exciting. There are these huge possibilities, but then there's always risk with doing anything new, and upside as well. It's not all downside. And that's sort of what's fun about looking at all this, is that it can go either direction, that adopting the new technologies that are lower emissions or that reduce the human strain on things, automation of certain things. But again, it can go either way. And so again, people don't know if they want to be the first to invest in it, and they want maybe someone else to work out the kinks first.
Yeah, well, that's typical. As I've been looking at some other aspects of this, it seems as if the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of experience, I think Julien mentioned supply chain aspects, suppliers not wanting to share really how they're doing because they're afraid that could impact their business. But for us to get a real handle on supply chain exposure for clients, you really need transparency into all these businesses. Do you see the lack of transparency between all the different parties in the ESG equation? Do you see that as a slowing factor in us really getting ahead of it? Lisa, any thoughts?
It's hard, right? It's easier for public companies. It's easier for household name companies because there is more information out there about them. Their suppliers may be things that often are things that no one's ever heard of and aren't public, don't disclose much, don't have to disclose much, and don't want to. And to some degree, the household names can put pressure on those suppliers to disclose things, but not on the tier 2 and the tier 3. And I mean, supply chain data is difficult to get your arms around anyway. Even some of the world's biggest and most sophisticated organizations that we work with, you start to look under the hood on their supply chain data and it's not there. They just don't have it. So it's a really hard thing to deal with, even just in the most traditional sense. But then in the explosion of the additional data you have to look at to get your arms around ESG for it, it's so much more. And it's going to take time. It's difficult, and it's change of behavior, and it's change of how things work. So it takes time.
When you mention sharing and the supply chain, it makes me think to something which I believe is fundamental if we want to get something done with regard to ESG. It's actually having this a collaborative posture. That SMEs represent the vast bulk of the ESG footprint, irrespective of the sector. ESG footprint lies within SMEs, and construction is a highly fragmented sector, with a lot of SMEs. So unless we are able to get those SMEs on board on that ESG journey, then even if the major gets there, it will be a failure, because you need to have everyone on the train to do that, because those SMEs, they lack financial resources. They don't have the resources basically of the major, whether it's technology, whether it's budget, whether it's people. So who can help the SMEs, improving, they're identifying and improving and finding mitigation actions to develop, well, the major. So you need that collaboration. And starting, we've seen that in other sectors, in luxury, in retail. I mean, even, in construction, I've seen, a very famous consultancy company setting up a council, trying to facilitate the engagement of stakeholders on climate. So you need those, those partnerships, those discussions, those exchanges to allow every owner, all of the supply chain to progress together and being able to actually roll out an efficient ESG roadmap and, most importantly, actions.
Now, do you feel we could reach a point that as a company owner, if I'm a contractor and I'm running my company, that I'll have an ESG score that I'll advertise? Do you see us getting a consistent, like a rating that we might have for these companies?
They're out there today, and there are different independent agencies that provide them now, and some companies do advertise them. Today, I don't think any one of them is all that meaningful, though. Again, like I said, they all weight different things differently, and they're sort of more intended for an investor audience today. But there's criticism of that, of how they weight things. I don't know if we should be calling out specific companies on this, but there's an article that it's not a construction company, but the article that someone called out that is in all the ESG funds and has a high ESG score, but the product that they make is they're in food and beverage, and the food and beverages that they make are not healthy. They're full of sugar, and in a world with a diabetes crisis, then why do they belong in there? So it's controversial, and it should be controversial, and that forces transparency.
Keep going on this thought, though. What will it take? Because I'm imagining a future where the insurance market, in order to give capacity, is going to say, you actually have to have an ESG score of this before we're going to be willing to give you our super package. You won't get it. Is there a group that might be leading that charge that could get us to that rating, that universal rating?
I don't think there's going to be one universal rating, but I think there will be various accepted universal ratings. And actually, we have our own coming out very soon. ESG clarified that will pull from various data sources, so you don't have to fill out a new form for it. And it's all relative to your industry, by the way. So that's what all ESG scores are. So it shows how you compare to your industry, which is in line with how we help broke for our clients anyway, we always help them put together that underwriting package and help them demonstrate why they are a better risk than their industry peers, or better than the underwriter thinks of them already.
But you see that in the future, it will be prominently displayed that we'll be showing that score regardless of the group that's accrediting it.
I do. I think there will have to be a story around it, because it's not simple. One thing, it's such a complex issue, but I think that will be one of many criteria that just becomes part of the insurance forms and underwriting criteria.
So how do we know then? Maybe it ties into one of our kind of wrap up questions here, but how do you know what good looks like from an ESG decision-making process? How do we know what good is? How do we tell our clients what good is?
I think it's old-fashioned risk management. It's clarity, it's thoroughness, it's having good governance around it. It's looking at it point by point. I mean, Julien, I think you'd have, I'm sure, more to say about it, but I think that managing it is you manage it like the many risks that sit under it, as you would if you had good risk governance anyway.
We do risk, right? So risk is by definition something which likelihood of occurrence is less than one. So we actually don't know what's going to happen. Risk might unfold, might not, we don't know. But to make sure that everything we do it the right way, it all boils down to what you said, governance. So if you have the right structure in place, you can't say that these risks will happen. Maybe something is going to happen and it will have dire consequences for the company or the sector. But what you could do to prevent that from happening is having, and I can't stress this enough, the right governance. So it means, and governance is not only about your company as one, but more about your supply chain. It's a governance, with your stakeholders. But if you really pay attention to your accountability towards your company, towards your employees, and towards the whole value chain, then most likely you might succeed. But it might be even more complex in the coming years before actually, being more simple. We're trying to facilitate, this. So Lisa talked about ESG clarified, but also we have few things on climate. For instance, we have the climate transition pathway and the accreditation framework, which is designed to assess an organization climate transition plan. So making sure that such plan is sound and thorough. And any company it could be actually construction or any other sector. But by getting this accreditation, you will have then access to a specific pool of careers, which have been pre-selected, under this accreditation and get a better package, a greater package, basically, whether it's capacity or whether it's premium or rate, whatever. But
and Julien, it could drive more investment, which is what we need in that as well. I want to wrap us up. First of all, I want to thank you both, but I want to give you both an opportunity to maybe give the listeners a picture from your perspective. As we look to close the insurance gap around ESG, what are the number one or two key areas that all of our listeners are going to start to see more and more of around ESG over the next couple of years? Lisa, why don't we start with you?
I think I've said it once and I'll say it again, that I think that the secret to managing ESG is risk management. And I think not enough companies are taking that approach, but I think you need to look at it as a whole and break it down to individual risks and figure out what you're going to do about it. And if you make announcements about your ESG targets, then make sure you have a plan to back it up. I think that's the biggest thing to me, is that risk managers have a really big role to play here and can add a lot of value here and aren't necessarily at the table yet today. I think the insurance piece will follow.
That's excellent. Julien, what do you think? From your perspective, what are people going to see a lot of here right away in the next year or two? What are they going to hear more and more about?
I remember working for a chemical organization years ago, which in their risk management process considered that any risk whatsoever, irrespective of their likelihood, if it was critical enough, then they should not see the likelihood, and that all of the risk should be dealt with the same way, because they consider that if it's critical, then it has to be managed. And why am I mentioning this? It's because we hear every day, is E more important? Is S more important? Is G more important? It's actually irrelevant. And to be fair, my conviction is everything by the end is S, because it's social, whether it's climate, whether it's governance. By the end, it's about the people, whether your employee, the people you work for, your clients, your providers. It's all about the people. If you want to get, a growing business, when you grow your market share, you want to be able to attract the right people. You don't want to be unable to be compliant with a specific regulation in China, France, or the US. It's like, pay attention equally to all these elements, and I'm sure you'll be good to go.
That's great. Julien, Lisa, thank you so much. Really good conversation.
Thanks, Bill. Pleasure to be here.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Listeners, thanks for joining us on this one, and we'll look forward to talking to you on the next Construction Blueprints podcast.
Thank you for joining this WTW podcast featuring the latest thinking and perspectives on people, capital, climate, and risk in the construction industry. For more information, visit WTWCO.com. Willis Towers Watson offers insurance-related services through its appropriately licensed and authorized companies in each country in which Willis Towers Watson operates. For further authorization and regulatory details about our Willis Towers Watson legal entities operating in your country, please refer to our Willis Towers Watson website. It is a regulatory requirement for us to consider our local licensing requirements. The information given in this podcast is believed to be accurate at the date of publication. This information may have subsequently changed or have been superseded and should not be relied upon to be accurate or suitable after this date. This podcast offers a general overview of its subject matter. It does not necessarily address every aspect of its subject or every product available in the market, and we disclaimer all liability to the fullest extent permitted by law. It is not intended to be, and should not be, used to replace specific advice relating to individual situations, and we do not offer, and this should not be seen as, legal, accounting, or tax advice. If you intend to take any action or make any decision on the basis of the content of this podcast, you should first seek specific advice from an appropriate professional. Some of the information in this podcast may be compiled from third-party sources we consider to be reliable. However, we do not guarantee and are not responsible for the accuracy of such. The views expressed are not necessarily those of Willis Towers Watson. Copyright Willis Towers Watson 2023. All rights reserved.